There are events that shake us and tragedies that might even break us. But even in our darkest hour, there's always hope.
In today's episode, hip-hop artist Tedashii shares his unforgettable story about tragedy, healing, and walking with God through life's toughest challenges. Don't go anywhere, you need to hear this.
He's a rapper, podcast host, public speaker, husband and father. Our guest today, Tedashii. Welcome back to the program.
Man, thank you for having me. Thank you. Always an honor to be here.
So, in ministry and yours being a ministry that involves music and that dynamic, what would you consider to be the central theme of what you want to present in your music? Purpose
and identity. Those two things are huge for me.
Yeah.
When I was young, when I was young in my faith, I read this book by a Christian therapist, and his name is Robert S. McGee. He's went on to be with the Lord, but he was from Dallas, and he wrote a book called The Search for Significance.
Yeah.
You know this book?
Yes.
I know this book.
Oh my good. People don't know this book. I'm sorry, I'm so hyped right now. People don't normally know this book. So I read this book as a young Christian, and it solidified for me the fact that there was significance already in me. It's so easy to think at times, well, I don't really matter to God because those people that do X, Y, or Z, they matter. I want people to recognize you have purpose and significance just because you bear the image of God. Yeah. But beyond that, what are you going to do with that purpose? So I want to angle you and encourage you to go that way.
Now, about 10 years ago, you faced a series of tragedies that really had a tremendous impact on your life and what you want to communicate in the message of your music. What were those and how did they have an impact on you?
Yeah. So first, my stepmother passed away from breast cancer. And she, stepmoms, they're either close to you or not close to you. But when I first met her, she pulled me in and by myself in the house, and she said, I just want you to know I love you like you're my own. I know you're not my son, but I'm gonna love you like you're my own. And then she hugged me and started crying. Aww. And she was so happy that we met. And so the backstory to that is I didn't grow up with my father. I met him later in life when I was in college. And so when I met him, I really met her for the first time, both of them together. So for her to do that, it always meant a lot to me. It was like, oh, I matter to you as well. Yeah. And so when she passed—
and you could feel it.
I felt it. It was genuine and it was consistent. Like it wasn't just a moment, it was, she did it year after year.
It was a nurturing thing because, if you're meeting your dad who's a stranger, and you're meeting your stepmom who's a stranger, they're kind of on equal footing.
Very much so, very much so. And so where I might have felt obligated to try to fight to connect with him more, I didn't necessarily feel that going to meet her for the first time, but she did, and she was intentional. And so when she passed, it was very hard because I'm sad for my dad losing his wife, my siblings to lose their mom, and then for me to lose a woman who loved me like I was her own. That love was real, and so it hurt a lot. And then from there, a year later, my sister passed away from leukemia, and she was 30 at the time. Wow. And so I watched my dad bury his daughter. I watched my siblings mourn their sister after losing their mom. And I'm sitting here going, I've never really lost a relative that close. My stepmom, yes, but this is different because I just met them. I didn't know them. So to lose her so soon into the process of knowing her, it brought a different level or a different type of experience to the grief I felt. And I'm sitting with my dad and again, we're new in relationship, but I'm trying to console and understand. And then fast forward 9 months later, my wife and I, we lose our 1-year-old son, Chase, and he passes away. And so now I'm in the place where my dad was, and I don't know what to do. And so back to back were these tragedies that took place that I don't think I was really prepared for.
Who does?
At all. No one.
Yeah.
No one. I definitely was taking the reins when my stepmother passed. I'm going to handle all the funeral arrangements. I'm going to do everything that needs to happen. Talk to the doctor, talk to these people. When my sister passed, I was present and helpful some, but I really was trying to console my dad, but I didn't know how. I don't know how to say it. What do you say to somebody who loses their child? then to be the one in his shoes, it was almost like, okay, life is against me, I see now. And it feels like grief is following me. So I don't.
Almost like you're being haunted.
Exactly. And so I was like, I don't want to do anything here anymore. God, just take me now. I'd rather not be here.
And you get to a place where you wonder, can it hurt any worse? Will it ever get any better? How do you crawl out of that? Because you got to crawl out of it. You can't walk out of it.
Yeah,
you can't run out of it.
You don't run out of it. So two things come to mind with the idea of how do you crawl out of it. The first thing is I had to mourn not just my son, but my hopes for him. You don't think that will happen.
Yeah.
So
it's not natural.
No. So even before he was here, I'm dreaming of what he's gonna be. Even while he's here, and his name is Chase, and I'm holding Chase, I'm like, man, you're gonna be this. I'm dreaming for him. So for him to leave this world, I also had to mourn and let go of the dreams and the hopes and the aspirations that I had for his life. And that was probably the hardest thing ever. Aside from the loss itself, was mourning and grieving those things. And then that started the crawl, I would say that. What kept the crawl going was having people in my life who wanted to be with me no matter where I was in this journey.
Yeah.
They weren't judgmental. They weren't just wanting me to do Christian stuff. Like, oh man, well, I know you're hurting. Let's read the Bible together. God's word is all powerful. And yet I just need a hug, man.
Yeah, they're just going to be there.
Just be there for me.
Yeah.
So people were there. They just stayed. They came in and they would sit with me and they would just hug me and hold me. They would sometimes just cry alongside of me. And we told our friends early on, we know you're trying to be respectful by being silent about Chase, but that's our son. We want to talk about him forever.
Yeah.
So it's okay to say his name. It's okay to talk about him. So people come up now and they're like, man, so how many kids you have? And I'm like, oh, I have 4 boys. At the time I just had Jaden and Chase. And now we have Callan and Kai. But I'm like, I'm the father of 4 boys. But I had to have a community around me who would be willing to journey with me as I figured all of that out and not be quick to judge my words or my actions or be uncomfortable around sadness. And having that allowed me to know that I was going to be cared for in the moments where I honestly didn't want to or know how to care for myself.
The story isn't over. We'll be right back. Are you currently facing a crisis? Stop trying to handle your situation in the natural when God is telling you to turn it over to Him.
This month, for any gift in support of the ministry, we will send you our specially designed Sanctuary of Hope thank you cards and Christmas cards. And for your generous gift of $125 or more today, we have a collection of resources ready to send you as our thank you. Send your best gift today. Call the number on screen or visit us today at jhm.org/prosper.
Welcome back to The Difference. We're here with Tedashii discussing the 3 back-to-back tragedies that tested his faith and pushed him to the edge. So you were telling us about the 3 tragedies. How did you have friends that surrounded you, that comfort you? Tell us a little bit about that.
How'd you identify a real one from a fake one?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. How did you know that one that was just...
Because at first,
everybody's
there.
Yes.
But you really found out,
who's your true friend.
When you walk through those kinds of seasons, you really have to say real friend, fake friend.
Yes, very much so. So in order to identify the friend, or at least answer that, I need to, give a little bit of the backstory. My son Chase passes away. The doctor says it's natural causes. Okay. So we are grieved but relieved because we were afraid we did something. But it didn't necessarily answer all the questions, because now we're like, well, why now, God? Okay, so nothing just happen per se, but naturally something did. And now we know you're in charge of all these things, God. What happened here? So I was devastated. I grew up in the faith, choosing to not just be a guy on the pew. I'm gonna lead small groups. I got ordained at 23 in the Missionary Baptist Church. I'm gonna make my life about sharing the gospel. So to get to this point and have a family, I honestly had let myself believe that I deserved a king's ransom. Man, when I go from this world, it's gonna be me on my bed with all my kids around me, my grandkids, everybody there. We're singing and crying and praying, but I'm celebrating. I'm going home to glory.
That's right.
But that's not my story.
Yeah.
And I was heartbroken about that. And then eventually that heartbreak turned to anger. It was about 6 months where I was trying to be like Martha, like, you need something? Who needs something? Let me clean this. Let me drive you here. No, y'all don't have to cook. I got it. Don't worry. And that was about all the distance I could go in my own strength was about 6 months. And that's when I broke. And when it really hit home for real, that I didn't have to go down the hall and change diapers anymore. I wasn't having to go wake up somebody from a nap. And that was the entrance of this new normal that was breaking my heart. And I went from optimistic to angry. And anyone that grieves, I tell them, you have the opportunity to either be constructive or destructive. And I chose to be destructive in my anger, the way I spoke to my wife, the way that I would disappear. I often would use what was comforting as a kid as a coping mechanism in this moment. So food became my vice. I grew up in the South, in Texas, near East Texas. So
Food and love are synonymous.
Synonymous, brother.
Yeah.
I ate fried catfish every day.
Yeah. If I love you, I'm gonna feed you.
I'm gonna feed you. If I love you, you're gonna eat good here.
Yeah.
And so I would often go to the places where love felt the realest, which was where they were making the food.
Yeah, the
And
escapism.
I would go to the escapism. But then I ended up going even further down the dark tunnel of it all because I didn't realize what it would be like to be a public figure and grieve publicly. So I didn't want to be myself anymore. I wanted to be someone else. My biological father is from an island in the South Pacific, Samoa. So I was like, I'm out. I'm going to Samoa. I'm just going to go there. And I basically decided to punt my life. I'm done here. I don't want to be here anymore. And the darkness became even more real. Eventually, I began to be isolated from people. I wasn't willing to be in community. I didn't want to be around people. Honestly, I would sneak away and go to Houston, and because we were living in Dallas at the time, and I'd go back to my old crew in Houston, and I would get high with them. I was drinking to numb pain, and I was losing
Living two different lives.
Living two different lives. I was losing myself, but I was okay with it because the true version of me had to face that pain, and I didn't want to face it.
Yeah.
Now, the real friends, not the fake ones, were attentive to that. They could see it. The real friends came and got me. They weren't ready. They weren't waiting for me to clean myself up to then be worthy of their company.
Yeah.
They came and got me.
They weren't praying for you in the far country. They came and dug you out of the pit.
They came and dug me out of the pit. Exactly. And what I realized was I was having my own Garden of Gethsemane moment where it was like, God, I don't want that cup. You got to let that cup pass. I don't want that. And unwilling to accept, not my will, your will be done. I didn't want that. And the more I had to accept God's will, the more I wanted to wrestle with God. But there's a good friend who recently passed. His name is Tim Keller, and he wrote a book on suffering. And he talks about how when we suffer, we either become the moralist or we become the cynic. I became both. Moralists say, man, God, if I'd have just read my Bible more, went to church more, prayed more, this wouldn't have happened. You wouldn't have took my son. But on the other side of it, you become the cynic and you go, well, God, you just don't care.
Yeah, I did all this for you.
I did all this for you and you did nothing for me. I'm done here. You were just out to lunch when this happened. And I realized we become one or the other because in reality, we're trying to control God. We want to control the outcome. And God is not the God to be controlled by us at all.
In any capacity.
In any capacity.
I know many of you who are watching, you've gone through tragedy in your own life and you want to know, are you cared for? I want you to know there is a God who cares deeply about every aspect of your being. And if you believe in him, you need to understand this. He truly believes in you. We'll have more of this conversation when we come back to the difference with Tedashii. You're watching Kendal and I, and we're thankful that you're here.
I'm so grateful that I chose differently. I'm so happy that I chose you. I get to see you become the person God intended you to be. Thank you, Hagee Ministry Legacy Partners.
There has never been a better time to share the love of Christ with a mother and a child than right now. When you partner with Hagee Ministries, your legacy impacts lives and transforms a nation. Call today or go to jhm.org/partner.
I think a couple of takeaways from just hearing your testimony about this process. It's a process.
Yes.
And in many ways, it doesn't have a conclusion. It just has a continuation as you begin to understand who you are and who God is. And you know, as a pastor who gets to walk through seasons like this with church members, and you know, in some respect, you know, as you're trying to comfort your dad in the loss of his wife, and you're trying to comfort the family in the loss of a sister, you know, it's frustrating when you don't have an answer. You know, as a pastor, people look at you and say, "Pastor, why?" And you know, you've been to school, you've got a degree, you've read books they haven't read. You know McGee, you know Keller. You know, I mean, you're supposed to be intern.
You're supposed to know.
You're supposed to have this intellect. And sometimes all you can do is just hold them and cry.
That's it, man.
You know, and not give an answer to why.
That's it.
And yet, also understand that every promise that God made isn't for this life.
That's right.
There's promises that they're not gonna be fulfilled until the next one. You know, I mean, think about it in this context.
That's good.
And we want what we want now.
Now, bro.
And
I need an answer now.
I need to know now. I need to feel it now. I need to see it now. I need for it to be now. And God's saying, not yet.
You know? The not yet for me was probably the hardest thing because I didn't know how to reconcile tragedy in the life of someone who was fighting so hard for you. I don't get that. I don't know that. And someone shared with me, and at the time, honestly, if I'm being honest, it wasn't comforting to hear. But eventually, it seldom is, especially in the heaviest parts of the pain. But someone was like, the very God who you're crying out to knows what it's like to lose a son as well. And I was like, don't say that to me. And now I'm like, I'm so grateful you know what it's like. Because on the other side, I get to see, oh yeah, you were with me in this. You didn't forsake me. That happened, but you didn't forsake me. And so one of the beauties of reading Tim Keller's book, he points out this idea in all of what we see, God is still in control. Now, we would say, at least I did, well, God, if you're in control, just stop it from happening. If you're in control, why would you let it happen? I want off the bus, God. I don't want this ride no more. And in reality, when I look at temptation, sin, suffering, it really is the enemy who causes all of this. If you look at the story of Job, Satan goes before God to get permission to be able to go in and bring pain to somebody's life. And he says, have you considered my servant Job? And he's like, okay, Job, sure. But the beauty of that verse to me, or that passage, God says, you can do this, but don't touch him. You can do that, but don't touch his body.
In his sovereignty, he permitted, but then he also stopped him.
Satan is always on a leash, but God was not in heaven like, man, when is Satan gonna show up? Because I'm ready for somebody to go through something. That wasn't it. It was the other way around. Satan is gonna go do it regardless, but he's on such a leash that God's like, well, I know you're gonna go do it, so let me aim this.
Well, and even in that, you know, I'll take you back to your playing days. When you were preparing for an opponent, you watched game film. And as the competition, you would sit there and analyze everything. When they line up like this, he's gonna get the ball. When they get in this formation, they're going here. When I see this, I know I gotta go there. The enemy does the same thing with our lives.
Very much so.
He watches game film on us. And he knows our tendencies.
Yes.
And he knows when we get in this posture,
Yes.
what our tendency is in terms of reaction. He knows that when these things happen, this is how we're going to turn out.
Yes.
And so, understanding that, I think that people, don't necessarily give the devil his due.
No, I agree.
He's been watching your game film for decades.
For decades.
And so he's like, the moment that I get the chance to put this bait out here in front of him, I'm not going to do it when he's strong.
Yeah, man.
I'm not going to do it whenever he can look at me and go, no.
Yeah.
And he builds the resistance to me.
Yes.
I'm going to do it in the moment when he's just broken and weak and fragile. And when I get him down to nothing, that's when, everybody
That's
says,
when.
Yeah, when you're down to nothing, God's up to something. Well, guess what?
Yeah.
Enemy is too.
The beauty, like what you're saying is so powerful because the enemy plays the long game. Sure, we may experience hardship in a moment and then followed up by some other hardship later, but the enemy plays the long game. It's not about just what happened to you now. It's about what that did to you, and if you didn't properly address it, what can happen 15 years later. And so I started to realize since I was a child, I dreamed about my children. I prayed for my children. I wrote names down of what they would be named.
Hey, you and me both, brother.
Come on. You know what I'm saying?
When we started dating, she was like, so how many kids do you want? I was like, I'm going to have 4, and here's their names.
Here's their names.
And
I got
she was
them
like,
already.
you said what?
Yeah.
I was like, these are non-negotiables.
That's it. Listen, I was the same way. So the enemy knew early on, like, oh, he has an affinity for these children. Yeah. And I love kids. Like, I grew up in a home where everybody's educators. I grew up around kids all my life. So the enemy knew. He knew, and he played the long game in this regard. And yet, again, we serve a God who has him on a leash.
That's right.
He can only go so far. And so even though this was allowed, I know it was at the hand of the enemy, not my Father in heaven.
Yeah.
And then I had friends who were honest with me, man, and would say, like I told a good buddy of mine, I was like, man, he said, what do you need? Like, I see you struggling. We love you. What do you need to be okay? Like, what do you think you need? And I honestly said this out of my mouth. I said, God needs to come to me and apologize for what he did to me. And he said, oh, okay. He said, man, so God in heaven needs to come to you. And I said, yes. And he said, man, if I'm gonna be honest with you, bro, that's the most demonic thing I ever heard in my life. And I was like, yo, you just said what? I was waiting for consoling. I was waiting. He was like, yes. He's like, if you don't be quiet. And I was like, oh, and he shook me with it. But I was so grateful for that word because it was demonic.
The wounds of a friend are faithful, though.
Yes, man. Yes.
He's like, look, this is going to hurt, but I'm going to set the bone right here.
Right here. And so that moment was a milestone moment for me because it made me go, no, at the end of the day, I would much rather be a wounded soldier in God's army than a fool in Satan's. So I was like, okay, God, where am I going to be? All right, well, this is still who you say you are. So I had to go back to the scriptures to see who God says he is.
Correct.
Okay, you are a good God. You are faithful. You are love. Okay, so how do I reconcile what I'm going through with the truth of who you say you are? Got it. I got to get out of the way. And that's when I had to go, I got to grieve the things that I really wanted, that I really still do want. But then once I was able to do that, I could move to 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. I don't grieve as the world grieves. Like I will see them.
Hope.
I don't grieve without hope. I'm going to see him again.
Correct.
I am sad day in and day out, sometimes weeks in and weeks out. He passed in March, and that month is a hard month for our home.
Yeah.
But in light of that, I don't grieve without hope. And I'm, through the journey of it, I've gotten to a place where I'm able to recognize there is hope. The hope is genuine. It's real. It comes from a real God who promised real things, who has
the evidence of that
accomplished.
hope is real.
It's real. Romans 5, hope does not make ashamed. Like it,
Correct.
It is real. He is not going to make me ashamed in my hope of him. I'm going to see Chase again.
Yeah.
And I don't know, be adult glorified body. It could be the age he was. I have no clue.
And back to those questions you can't answer.
You can't answer those.
But to things that you are certain of.
Yes, yes.
You know, I mean, we read in the book of James, and James references Job.
Yes.
You know, you're talking about Job.
Yeah.
And it says, we count them blessed who endure.
Who endure.
Who have seen the end from the beginning. And then he goes and he visits Job.
Yes.
You know, and we have the privilege of the entire story condensed and handed to us.
Exactly.
But Job didn't. Job's wife didn't. You know, I always say that one of the most misjudged people in the whole Bible is Job's wife.
I agree.
You know,
Yes.
I tell people, I said, we owe her an apology.
Yes.
Because not only did she go through what Job went through,
Yes.
but she went one step further. She lost Job.
She lost Job. Yes.
You know, she didn't just lose her kids, and she didn't lose the status, and she didn't lose the business. At the end of the day, the man that promised her, I'll take care of everything,
Yeah.
and did,
Yeah.
is now sitting on an ash heap.
Yes.
And she's like, and I lose him too?
Yes.
Now, what would you think she looked like? If you were gonna give me a picture of her based on the first 3 chapters of the book, you say, well, she's a little sawed-off 4-foot lady, you know,
like
with
small,
a bony
kinda,
finger and, you know, got a
kinda
wart on her. Yeah,
mean.
she's like, you know, Job died,
Totally.
died.
Totally.
She couldn't have been that.
No.
Because he had 10 kids with her the first time.
That's true, brother.
And
Come
you
on,
get to the
say
end of the
that.
book, he had 10 kids with her a second
Say
time.
that, brother.
So when you're having kids in your old age, she's still looking good.
She still looks good.
I hate to be so, you know, natural about it, but there's
but it's real.
20
It's
kids with
true.
one woman. She's got to be hot.
Yeah. She's
You know?
she's still drawing him in somehow. Very much
Something's
so.
working.
Something's there.
You know,
Brother, say that.
And to the point, we judge her. we judge her because we get to see how she reacted in her weakest and most vulnerable moment.
Yeah.
We judge her because she said something she felt in a moment where she could feel anything. And instead of giving her the space to feel it and just say, go ahead and let it out, we look at her and go, how dare you?
How would you ever say yes?
Yeah, how dare you?
Yeah, man.
And it's like, no, just walk with them. Just walk with them through it and don't judge them for it. And then allow God to show them what his plan is in the back half.
I spoke about a friend who spoke to me, but the other person was my wife.
Yeah.
It really was.
Had to be.
It was her willingness to.
Because this either pulls you together or tears you apart.
Or tears you apart. I got a call from Mercy Me the morning it happened, and the lead singer, Bart, is a good friend. All of them are good friends, but Bart was like, hey man, just know the odds are not in your favor here for marriage. Like statistically, these marriages don't make it. Yeah. But we're praying another prayer for you. And it was that, I mean, hearing it so early on, I knew to fight for it, but for the days that I wasn't able to, my wife was fighting for it. And I wanted to think, well, you're just mean and you want what you want and you're not really for me. And really, I'm like, oh, you, and now coming out of the grief of it all, the heaviness of it all, she's like, no, I was in the closet praying for you. I was over here watching the kids while you were doing what you were doing because you couldn't handle her. She calls it my season of sleepwalking. She was like, you were here, but you were not here. And I had to endure that. And I just go, yeah, I got a real one.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
You got a partner.
Very much so. She held it down, bro. So.
Well, you know, many of you who've walked through difficult seasons, you wonder where the strength for the next step comes from. Sometimes it comes from the written word of God. Sometimes it comes from the spoken word of God. Sometimes it comes from hearing how others endured and believing that if God helped them, he can help you. I pray that you've been encouraged by our conversation today, and we thank you for being a part of and watching the difference.